All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the Rapid 7 webinar, Credentials are the New Exploits, How to Effectively Use Credentials in Penetration Tests. My name is Kelly Garofalo and I'll be our moderator today. Today's webinar will take approximately 1 hour, including time for questions at the end. We'll record the session and send out the recording to you in a couple of days. You can ask questions at any time using the chat feature and we will get to them as soon as we can. As an attendee of this webcast, you're eligible for 1 CPE credit. You can report on your organization's website, for example, on icsquared.org, and we strongly recommend that you keep a copy of your webcast registration email in case you get audited. For detailed instructions on how to self-report, please visit bit.ly/r7cpe and note that the bit.ly code in the URL is case sensitive. All right, and finally, I'll hand it over to your presenter today, Christian Kirsch. Over to you, Chris.
All right, thank you, Kelly. So today we're going to talk about credentials, and credentials are not really a new thing for penetration testers, but there are some very good reasons why we picked up this topic again this year, and why we think it's important to you, and we also want to show you some new trends and new features. So as part of this webcast, we will talk about trends that increasingly cause attackers to use credentials. There's a big shift there, both on the attacker side, also on the penetration testing side, and also the ways that hackers obtain credentials and move across the network. We'll cover some techniques penetration testers use to simulate credentials abuse, and a look at more efficient ways to manage and reuse credentials as part of your penetration test. And then we'll go into a live demo and, as Kelly said, a Q&A at the end. All right, so just a really quick level set. What do we mean by credentials in this webcast? So first of all, generally credentials are things that let you in somewhere. It's the keys that let you into a door. It's your room key in the hotel. It's your PIN code that lets you into the janitor's closet or the bathroom. So in the digital world, what we mean by that in the sense of a penetration test or intruders who are trying to get into your network, it's not only usernames and passwords, but it's also things like password hashes, which are a secure way to store a password, and also SSH keys, so kind of like your virtual badges to get in. If you've ever done penetration testing with credentials, you're probably going to be very, very familiar with those. I just wanted to point out that as we're talking about this topic today, we're not just talking about passwords, but also these other things. So a few months ago, we talked to a bunch of pen testers, and we were hearing certain anecdotes again and again. People told us, like, hey, I hardly use exploits on my assessments anymore. I focus mostly on credentials now. We thought, this is interesting. And we heard this from our own people. We heard this from external people as well. And so we thought, okay, is this just a sample bias here, or is there more to the story? And so we conducted a Metasploit user survey in the beginning of this year and asked people, hey, how much do you use credentials versus exploits? And it turned out that 59% of people use exploits for half or more of their pen test. So that's a huge, huge number. And that was way over 500 people who responded to this particular question. So we thought, hey, there's something here. There's a trend that's worth looking at. So if we look at the attacker side as well, not penetration testers, but actually malicious attackers out on the internet, the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, reports that credentials have now become the #1 attacker methodology. They've really risen, consistently and rapidly over the past few years, and are now by far at #1. So why is this? Well, there are a few reasons, in my opinion, why attackers are switching over to credentials. First of all, organizations are simply getting better at vulnerability management. They're not perfect. It's not all that you can no longer get onto a network with exploitation, but they are getting better. It's getting harder. And so, the standard exploits, poster child is MS-08, 067, you'll have a harder time finding that on the network. You might still find it in some cases, but not as prevalent as a few years ago. And Windows XP has been taken out of maintenance. It's still deployed in some spaces, but it's going to become less and less. Also, Microsoft, we're all hitting on Microsoft pretty hard, but they've actually done a decent job at making exploitation harder over the past few years. None of these techniques are particularly new, but if you look at them as a trend over the past few years, there's DEP, ASLR, EMET, and so on that are really making life a lot harder for people who are trying to exploit. You have to find ways around that or find machines where this isn't deployed. And then generally, 64-bit addressing has made traditional memory corruptions, impossible. And that's adding to the whole picture. And also think about not getting caught. If you're using an exploit, there's no legitimate reason to use an exploit on a network. Exploits are always illegitimate and always malicious. But credentials, that's a different story. Users use credentials all the time for legitimate purposes, and it's actually very hard for a defender to distinguish a normal user from an attacker using credentials. So how does a credentials-based attack work on the network? Well, you have to start out with one foothold to get into the organization. So you might be able to get credentials through phishing. That's a very common way. So for example, you might clone an Outlook web access page and phish people to go there and log in. And because you control that page, you now have their Outlook web access credentials, which are also their Windows credentials. So you have credentials to get into the network. Some attackers look at public third-party leaks. So for example, the LinkedIn breach, the Adobe breach, where company email addresses were associated with credentials. And while it's not always the case that these passwords are identical with the passwords that people use on their corporate network, people reuse passwords quite a lot. We know this from many, many studies and probably also personal experience. I think probably every one of us, even though we know better, have used the same password across 2 different systems. And then you can simply guess passwords. There are a lot of passwords that are very frequently used, and if you look at the list, it's actually quite sad because password 123 or 123456 is very high on those lists. The only improvement we've seen is because people are now requesting longer passwords. We see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 maybe as a password in the top 10 lists. But it's really actually quite easy to guess passwords. And then finally, you can always still use exploitation to get onto the first system. And then, so once you've used any of these techniques to get onto the first system, you compromise one machine and download passwords and password hashes, maybe SSH keys from that machine, use those to gain access to additional machines on the network, which you then in turn compromise, loot, get passwords and password hashes, etc., credentials from, and use them against other machines and so on. And this is a really effective domino effect with which you can start to own the entire network. It's very, very powerful. So what are some of the challenges that penetration testers are facing today? Well, credentials management today is actually often a very manual process. People use Excel or even just a text-based editor, note down username and password combinations, write down where they worked, and so on. But it's really quite time-intensive, and people might miss things. It's harder to actually use these types of lists to leverage them against other parts of the network. So it introduces a lot of inefficiencies and a lot of pain for the penetration testers. So the key challenge here is testing the #1 attack vector is very time-consuming. We're seeing that penetration testers are increasingly using credentials, but they're really saying, hey, it's actually it's an effective way, but we're actually being very inefficient in the way we're doing this. So if you're being inefficient, that probably means you don't expose the entire risk in your organization, and you actually have lower productivity. So you might not get to do all the penetration tests that you're being asked to, or you are not getting to other projects in the organization. Just a quick word on why productivity is important, because it's a term that's often thrown around, and everybody understands, okay, higher productivity is better, but it's actually critical to solving some security problems that we have as an industry today. Finding quality talent today is really hard. Cisco published a study, I think it was earlier this year, that the industry is right now short of 1 million security professionals worldwide. So if you're trying to hire somebody, it's hard. And penetration testers are even more specialized than, let's say, your quote-unquote average security professional who's more of a generalist and going broader. So these people are highly valuable and really hard to find. So the solution to this problem, one way is to train up new people. That takes time, and it's hard because it's a hard skill to acquire. But the other way to do that more immediately is to increase productivity, help people do their job more efficiently, help them do it in half the time. And higher productivity therefore also means better risk assessment. You can either test more in the same assessment, or you can actually test quicker and get to more assessments. Right, so in Metasploit Pro, we've added some new features, and these are all around making working with credentials easier and more efficient. So for example, we've added new credentials management, an easier way to quickly validate credentials, efficient credential reuse across the organization, and a clear and concise credentials report. Because another thing we learned is that a lot of people hate writing reports. And also, anecdotally, we've heard often that when you conduct your assessment and you're noting things down manually so that you can write up your report later, oftentimes you might miss certain things. You might not document every step. You might forget to write down certain credentials, certain findings, and so on. And when you then go off-site and write your report, and typically it's not done on-site, you're doing it on your flight home or back in the office a day or two later, then you're missing that information. So Metasploit tracks all of the things that you're doing and all of your findings so that you have a full report at the end. So we conducted some customer testing. We call this the tech preview. And we had some very, very positive feedback on these new features. And I liked one here from Bob Jones from the city of Corpus Christi, who actually blogged about his experience in the tech preview. And Bob is more of a command line guy. But here he is actually saying, hey, I honestly had no desire to do this, so all the credentials testing, from the command line with each permutation. I think this feature is actually rekindling a relationship with my mouse. I thought that was really, really cute and interesting. So the problem is not that you don't know how to do this from the command line. The problem is not that, yes, of course, there's some way to script this, but you're adding to your workload, you're making your life unnecessarily hard, and you're not getting to the important parts of your job. You should be using your brain to figure out attack vectors, to figure out how you can stop attackers, and to give a good risk assessment and a good recommendation to your customers on how to secure their environments better, not on writing scripts and how to automate things. All right, so before we jump into the demo, I quickly wanted to give you an overview of what I'm going to show you. So in this demo, we cut the scope of the demo down a little bit for timing reasons. And we're going to start with or some of the things I've prepared before the demo is we're assuming that you have phished somebody with a fake Outlook web access page. You know that in Metasploit Pro you can simply clone other web pages, then host them in Metasploit and capture the credentials that people type in. So we've done that, and we've gained one credentials pair, which in this demo is simply administrator and not password as the password. And then we've already discovered the network that we're attacking, because that typically takes a little bit of time, and we wanted to cut down that time as part of the demo. It's not super exciting, and so we've already discovered this, and now what we're doing as part of the real demo is to actually do the credentials reuse feature. So we're going to add the credential to the managed credential list. We're going to reuse that against all of the machines on the network to see which machines they work on. And then we're going to use a meta module called the known credentials intrusion meta module to get sessions on that machine, and then the collect evidence feature to collect the passwords from the machine. We'll actually get some password hashes. We'll reuse these again using the reuse feature to see where they work, and we could go on probably for quite a few rounds owning more and more machines on the network, but again, for timing purposes, we will stop here. All right, so let me switch over to our demo here, and let's see if I'm still logged in. Yes, I still have a session. All right, perfect. So we've already scanned the network, and we've got an environment with a few hosts here, 23 in total. They've all been scanned, but we don't have a session on any one of them. So you'll notice, if you're familiar with Metasploit Pro, that is, that we've added a new menu here at the top called Credentials. So credentials are now a first-class citizen in Metasploit world, and if we click on Manage here, we'll have the chance to add the credential that we phished earlier. So I'm going to click on the Add button here. We're going to type in administrator, and plain text password, not password, is the password. And we can also assign tags to credentials to tell us, for example, where we got it from. So we can say, all right, this one came in through phishing. And now what we do next is we will actually use this credential to check where it works on the network. So there's, under credentials, there's a reuse feature. And so we will now try out this credential on all of these machines. We'll add those to the shopping cart here. We go to the next screen where we can select the credentials that we want to test the reuse on. And we just have one at this point, so we'll just select this one, add that to the shopping cart, and go to the review screen. And we have these targets. We're trying it out with this credential. We're going to launch. All right, so this will take a moment to calculate and set up. And what it does now is it figures out, okay, where does it make sense to use this type of credential? It's a plain text or clear text credential, so it works on, potentially works on a lot of different services. Unlike, for example, an an SMB hash, which you can only use on SMB services. So that it wouldn't make sense, for example, to try it out on some other type of service. And now we've done 60 login attempts. We've done 5 successful logins. And if we go back to manage credentials, we can actually see what they were and where they work. But you see that this was super quick and easy to try out this credential on all these machines. So let's go back to manage. We see now that this credential pair with a round workstation, which is kind of like the local machine, local admin, is has been validated on 5 machines. If we click on that credential, we can actually see which machines they are. And if we now want to compromise these machines, we'll go into Modules, Meta-Modules, and choose a very handy tool here called the Known Credentials Intrusion. So this will use any type of credential that we have in the database and replay that against hosts to get a session and to compromise machine. So as a connection here, we'll have to choose bind. This is just in this particular demo environment because the machines are not allowed to talk back out to me. We don't want to generate a report at this stage because we're only halfway through. All right, I'm going to launch this now. We're going to wait for a few seconds for these sessions to open. So the meta modules, there are a few different ones. They're basically for streamlining certain discrete tasks that you might want to carry out on the network. The known credentials intrusion is really a very quick and easy one. If you have any credentials and you want to compromise a machine, get a session, that's the easiest way to do that. So I think it's still calculating. Yeah, we've got the first session. It's going to go through each one of them to create the sessions. And we see here at the top as well the number of active sessions that we have. And we'll see the same over here as tasks. So the known credential intrusion task is running right now. That's where we're seeing a 1 task active here. Right, we'll need to wait a little bit longer until we have compromised all of the machines. And by the way, you can always switch over to the task log to see what kind of feedback you're getting from the command line on these actions. So if you're familiar with the command line, that's a great way to do that. All right, we've got our second session, and we'll go into the sessions and collect the evidence in a second. So collecting evidence basically means it's a high-level function that lets you grab screenshots, passwords, password hashes, system information, all of the loot that you might want to collect from systems to later report on, or to leverage as part of your penetration test. And it's packaged really nicely in Metasploit. By the way, if you have any questions, feel free to post those in the question pane on your screen, and we will get to those in just a minute when we're done with this demo. Okay, 3 out of 4 sessions. All right, great. So let's go into the Sessions tab now. All right, so we've gotten sessions on these 3 machines, and we can now go and collect. So from these machines, we will collect system information, passwords, SSH keys, and so on. We can switch off some of these other things so it doesn't take too long. And hit collect system data here. And now what it'll do is it'll reach out to these machines through the Meterpreter session that we have on there and grab all of the information. What we can do is actually we can go into the credentials management screen and hit refresh a couple of times, and we'll see those pop in. So these were the original credentials that we had earlier. Let me try and reload. Just refreshing right now. No, we don't have them yet. Okay, here we go. So now we see some of the additional credentials that we gathered from these compromised machines. So you see that we have MSF admin, root, user 1, and so on, NTLM hashes, and we're now going to try these out again against other machines. So you would simply repeat the process that we did earlier, credentials reuse. And here, there is actually a neat feature here with a filter. If I have an NTLM hash and I know that I only want to test this against SMB, then I can just type that in here. It selects only those services on those machines that are SMB, and I can add that to the list. This is going to cut down the time that I'm going to need to try these out. And you can have similar filters for the passwords and password hashes here, right? But we're still going to use all of those. Administrator we've already tried, but we're just going to throw that in the mix. Review and launch, and you'll get you'll be able to test out where these additional credentials work. And of course, because these are password hashes, we're going to use not a straight clear text logon, but a pass the hash attack. But Metasploit will take care of that automatically. It's all transparent to you as a user. All right, so we're seeing here that with these, we've got 24 validated logins now. We can click on that, and these are the usernames, the machines, and so on. We can also go back into Manage if we want to have a look at that by user. For example, here, the root user, we could click on that, and we would get an overview what machines this worked on. All right, good. So we could go in that cycle further and further, but I think you're getting the gist of it. It's a really powerful domino effect kind of thing that you can do on the network to use credentials to really get very deep into the network very, very quickly. All right, so I also said that you can report on credentials at the end. Quick one-button thing. So we have a new credentials report in Metasploit Pro 4.10, and one thing that I like here is these two graphics. So top hosts by logins, so this shows you which machines were actually the most vulnerable to credential-based attacks. And then you've got another view, which is the top shared credentials by related hosts. So for example, if you have a local admin password that you share across all machines, that would really show up here and light up like a Christmas tree and show you that this introduces a big risk in your environment that you should probably get ahead of that and handle that risk. Then another interesting view is the credential details. So you can actually look at the lists of credentials and say, all right, you know, which credential actually impacted how many hosts and what were they. You can mask the passwords if you don't want to have those included in the report, or you can print them out as plain text, either way, depending on what your assignment requires. So this is not the same screen as the one that I showed before to introduce you to the demo. This is a screen to walk you through how you could detect these kind of attacks on the network. So let's switch over real quick from the view of a pen tester to the view of a defender. Credential-based attacks, as I said, are really hard to detect. We have a product at Rapid7 called User Insight that plays in the incident detection and response space. And I just wanted to walk you through where this product could hook in and actually help you flag a malicious user on your network. So first of all, in the phishing stage on the left, you can flag users who receive malicious links. We can either look at threat feeds and see who tried to reach out to a malicious URL, or we can also, if we know that one particular user has been phished, we can take that URL and very quickly and easily check who else also received the same URL. We can also track users' general susceptibility to phishing attacks and their level of phishing security awareness. So Metasploit has a phishing component that allows you to send out quote-unquote benign phishes that simulate a phishing attack on your network, try to get people to click on a link, to enter credentials on a fake page, and then deliver a training page. and you can track which users are vulnerable to that, and you can also track it on a percentage aggregate basis. The interesting thing is we can integrate user insight with Metasploit to give you that data in the context of your user. So if you're investigating an incident, then you can say, all right, this user got this phishing email as well, and they've got a really bad track record of clicking on everything. So I really want to follow up on this one. Whereas this other user, he's really hard to phish. So it gives you a little bit of more of a flavor as part of your incident investigation. Then discovery, we'd already done a discovery scan as part of this demo, and with user insight, we can detect scans on the network through honeypots. Now, some of you may have played around with honeypots. They're typically quite, the concept is basic, that you put a machine on the network that doesn't do anything but wait for an attacker to contact it and then raise alarms. The challenge is often that it's actually quite hard to maintain these and actually make them work for you rather than requiring your time as you're setting them up and maintaining them on the network. So with User Insight, we actually make honeypots available as virtual machines for you to download. You deploy them, you never have to touch them again. They're self-servicing and so on. And they feed into User Insight to let you know when anybody's scanning the network. So really quite easy and quite powerful to catch attackers early on in the discovery phase. And then when we're looking at what we did as part of the credentials part of the demo, so here when we try to compromise a machine, we're using Meterpreter to actually get onto the machine or some kind of payload. And sometimes antivirus solutions will catch those payloads. So we have an integration with User Insight to flag that and to correlate that to the user and to show you where a backdoor has been placed on a machine. And if you try to brute force a user or a number of users on the network, then we also have the concept of honey users to raise alarms here. So a honey user is basically a decoy user that you have in your Active Directory that's not an actual user that's doing anything on the network. And if somebody's enumerating your users and trying to log on with that particular user to any system, you automatically know that it's a malicious attack. And then with User Insight, we also do endpoint monitoring to detect pass-the-hash attacks, and we can monitor that without having to deploy an agent to the machines. And again, with a pass-the-hash attack, if you try to compromise a machine, you'll again need to place a payload onto the machine. So this makes it actually something that's typically fairly hard to detect, makes it a lot easier. So if you're more on the defensive side of the house than on the penetration testing side, then this might be an interesting product for you to look into. And one thing that we love doing with User Insight is to work with our internal team of penetration testers to run their typical scenarios on our network, and we're tuning the tool to really help us catch these types of attacks. All right, so let's summarize before we jump into the Q&A. First of all, credentials are the #1 attacker methodology right now, according to this year's Verizon Data Breach Investigations report. And both attackers and legitimate penetration testers are moving from exploits to credentials because it's become a lot harder to use exploits and it's easier to get caught. Therefore, if the attackers are using credentials, you as a penetration tester should also use credentials to accurately assess the risk on your network. Managing credentials today, if you're using Metasploit framework on its own or a bunch of tools together, is often very manual and therefore somewhat inefficient. And so if that's the case, then you're not doing yourself a huge favor when testing for the #1 attacker methodology. There is a shortage of penetration testers and security professionals out in the industry, so think about making yourself more productive as helping out the entire industry, because you'll be able to help more people and get more done. And Rapid7 can help you both with the risk assessment side, making more efficient there, but also with detecting credentials abuse as part of our user insight, incident detection, and investigation tool. All right, so now let's jump into questions, and let's go to the first question here. How do I get my first credential to start compromising a network? Well, I think we talked about that a little bit as part of the demo setup. So phishing is a very popular way. If you look at some of the big breaches, if you look at incident reports that have become public, at any of the statistics, phishing is at the very top of the list. Public leaks is another one. Third-party breaches, so LinkedIn, Adobe, the eBay breach, which disclosed credentials. We actually, as part of user insight, use threat feeds that show us which users inside your organization have had leaked third-party credentials. We alert you to that so that you can contact that user and check with the user whether they were reusing the credential or simply require them to change their password at that point in time. Then credential guessing is a good way to get passwords, so simple dictionary attacks, those kind of things. I think those are probably the top 3 ways. All right, next question here. What can I do to protect my network against credential-based attacks? Well, I think there are a few different things. One is require complex password rules. That's a given. I think you need to think beyond Windows, though, and also include some of the other types of services that you have on the network. You might have cloud applications. You might have self-provisioned services on the network, or service accounts that are using not ideal passwords, default passwords, and so on. So do an audit of your network, educate your users. Also make sure that you don't reuse local administrator accounts, account passwords, because those are really easy to use in pass-the-hash attacks. So I think that would be it. And then also make sure that you have something in place to detect intruders coming onto your network. There's more and more of a realization in the industry that, yes, you need to invest in prevention, but you will never be able to keep attackers out in all cases. So you need to have a really good process in place to detect attackers on your network and to investigate and to kick them out again. And I showed you User Insight as one of those tools, and it's very, very strong in this area of credentials and identifying users that have been compromised. But there are others as well, and I encourage you to look into that. And I also encourage you to actually put a tool, a process, and the people in place to monitor intrusions on your network, because this is going to be increasingly important over the next few years. And Gartner actually recommends that you do think about spending more of your budget over the coming years in incident detection and response. Okay, then one question here: can I import credentials into Metasploit Pro? We saw as part of the demo that you can manually add credentials, but you can also import them. And let me go to the main credentials screen, and I'll show you where that is done. So here on the credentials manage, and then click on add. And on the top right here, you'll see that the pre-selected thing is manual entering of credentials, but there's also a button for import. And you can choose a file here. There's a file selection button. And the formats that we support are straight up CSVs or pwdump. And then you can also select for the CSVs what kind of password this is. You can even tag the import so that if you have several sources, you can actually know where a password came from or a credential. And pwdump is a standard format, so there's less to fill in for that. All right. So let's go to the next question here. Hold on, I've answered quite a few already, so let me just read through and skip over the duplicates. Okay, somebody's asking for the link for the CPE credit. So I will just flip over to the presentation and just keep that slide up for a little bit. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. That's better. Okay. So here's the link, and please pay attention to typing in the link. It's case sensitive, so R7 CPE, that part needs to be uppercase. Okay. All right, here's a question. How would one gain access to the internal network when coming from the outside? All right, yeah. So when you phish a user, then there are different ways of how you can phish the user. You can either straight up serve a forum page where you're asking for credentials, so for example by copying an Outlook web access page. And in that case, you would just have the credential. You wouldn't actually have access to the internal network. But if you serve up a browser exploit, or if you serve up a little Java applet and somehow trick the user into accepting that, which if you use the right pretext in your phishing campaign you can do, then you actually gain control over that user's computer. And if that user is inside the corporate network, then you can actually use that user's computer as your pivot and scan the internal network through that host and exploit the internal network through that host, so either through exploits or credentials. So this is how a lot of these attacks are happening. So once you've compromised one user, you can really assume that you're on the inside. And this is also why I think it's really important that you do both penetration tests and vulnerability management inside your organization as well as for the external addresses. Because it just takes one phished user with an outdated browser, or not even an outdated browser, just accepting a Java application, and your attacker is basically on the inside, as if they were plugged in through the wall inside your office. Okay, so let me read some of the other questions here. All right, so one user is asking if you use weak passwords, then they're easily guessed, but what about passwords that are harder to guess? Well, if you're phishing a user and you're asking them to type in the password, then it doesn't matter how complex the password is. You might actually get a very complex password for free, let's say. Also, in pass-the-hash attacks, when you grab password hashes and replay them against the rest of the network, it doesn't matter how complex the password is, it'll always work. That doesn't, complex passwords help you a little bit against guessing, but they don't help you against all types of credential-based attacks. One really good thing, especially if you're talking about web applications, is to use two-factor authentication. In fact, we require that for our web-based applications for everything, because it it requires something that you own in addition to something that you know. And if you as the attacker don't have access to my cell phone to show you the second factor, then you're not going to be able to get in. Okay, there's more questions here, so just give me a chance to read those. All right, okay, here's one question. How do you bypass antivirus or endpoint detectors? So I assume that by endpoint detectors you mean host-based IDS, and antivirus is clear. So when you compromise a system using Metasploit Pro, one thing that's actually switched on by default is our antivirus evasion. It's a feature that we call dynamic payloads. And dynamic payloads basically randomize the payload as it is brought over to your system, so that traditional signature-based antivirus solutions don't work because they have nothing to match against. It's a random piece of code. And they also behave in a way that's not suspicious. They use the same type of function calls and same kind of behavior that a regular application would use that you have on your machine. And as part of the dynamic payloads, we also have a feature called stage encoding, I think it's called, which encodes the communication between the stager and Metasploit when it delivers the payload, so that the payload also doesn't get detected over a host-based or a perimeter intrusion detection system. We have other ways to get past intrusion detection systems as well, but those are probably the main ones that are also very efficient and effective. Right, there's a couple of duplicates here, so let me just read through the rest. All right, so one question here is, what, if any, impact will running the credential scan have on the target systems? Well, it depends on what kind of lockout policy you have on which kind of a service. So when you conduct the pen test, be aware of what the lockout policy is for certain accounts. And one thing that you can do and that I would recommend is simply select either services that have a very high lockout count or no lockout count, or select a low number of how do you call this? For the same account, don't select too many passwords to use. In this case, we reused passwords for one particular user at a time. So administrator only had one password associated with it. It wasn't a brute forcing of the accounts, so that if administrator with that password didn't work on that machine, it's just one count. And then you try out the next user. So that's actually not, that doesn't have a very high lockout risk. If you're doing brute forcing on the network, that does have a higher lockout risk, and here you might consider a technique like striping, where you try out one password, like password 123, but try that out for all the users. And let's say if you're trying that out on 1,000 users, then by the time you have reached the end of those 1,000 users, first of all, you'll probably have one machine that's compromised or a few. Secondly, if any of these accounts got locked out, often companies have a lockout period of, like, let's say 15 minutes or something, and after that the account unlocks again. So you can just try the next password with exactly the same users and try that out on the network. I believe that's a technique that people call striping. So that's a good way to get out around lockout policies. All right, I'm scanning through the questions here. Can we get a copy of the presentation slides? So this session is actually being recorded, and you can watch the recording, but we can also get you the presentation. In fact, it actually gets sent out to all the attendees automatically by email. So my colleague Kelly will take care of that. And by the way, if you have any questions for me later, I'll just go to the thank you slide because my email and my Twitter handle are on there, so you're free to ask me questions on that. Let me just bring up that slide. Okay. You can also try to send me phishing emails, but I won't really appreciate that. Okay, some more questions here. Okay, we're getting a lot of duplicate questions here. Okay, so are the credentials stored in the list of managed credentials secured? So these are all stored in the local Metasploit database. I believe they're encrypted, and there's also the access control through your Metasploit user account. We do conduct a lot of product pen tests on Metasploit to ensure that the systems are secure. And so we believe that we've got really good security for your credentials. One way to also think about it, yes, they are secure in Metasploit, but also think about where these credentials came from. This is not a corporate credential store that is supposed to protect your credentials. These credentials were actually gathered using very straightforward hacking techniques that anybody on the internet could also leverage against their enterprise. So if you're worried about these credentials being in Metasploit, you should probably, as a bigger risk, look at why was Metasploit able to get to these credentials in the first place. Just some food for thought. And by the way, I think I mentioned it, but when you're reporting on these credentials, you can star them out. It's a feature called Mask Credentials. It's a checkbox in the reporting, because when you share those reports, of course, you don't want, people in, let's say, IT operations who are helping you to cycle those passwords. You don't want those people to be able to impersonate other users by knowing their passwords. Okay, I think those were probably, is there an upper limit to the feasible number of credentials we can feed through Metasploit? I'm sure there is a theoretical limit. We've not reached one in our testing or with our customers. I know that we have, this is not really answering the question for credentials, but active sessions where we're actually holding a connection with a compromised client. We've had over 1,000 and in one project at the same time, and you can manage, I think, 5 to 10,000 machines per project is about what we recommend. After that, the interface starts to get a little bit sluggish, but it's very, very scalable. If you are anticipating large projects like that, I would recommend that you run those projects on Linux, not Windows. Tends to be a little bit leaner, and you can push your limits a little bit higher. And I would also recommend that you add some more memory because, of course, the bigger a project is and the more active sessions you have, then that's going to take up some memory on your side. So that'll just give you a better user experience. Okay, I think those are all the questions we're able to get to today. So thank you so much for joining. I've got my email address on the screen if you have any more questions. You can also ask your questions to info@rapid7.com. And if you'd like to try out some of the features you saw today, please visit the Rapid7 website and register for a free trial of Metasploit Pro or any other Rapid7 product. We actually do have an eval option for user insight as well. Feel free to download that or to contact us if you want a presentation or some help with the eval. Thanks for joining us today, and we hope you enjoyed the presentation. Goodbye.